One of the most impressive games I played last year was Neva. This little indie platformer by Nomada Studios was the follow-up to their critically acclaimed puzzle platformer, Greece. Now, Greece explored some heavy themes and packaged them into a beautifully vibrant but short experience. And experience really is the key word there. There are tons of puzzle platformers, there are tons of games that are about grief, and there are tons of games that have pretty art styles. But it's how Greece used its art and minimalist gameplay to deliver a genuinely touching story that made it stand out at the time. The simplicity of playing Greece essentially freed up your brain power to digest what was happening narratively as you experienced it. It's not the kind of game you replay, but that's okay. The power of Greece was in its presentation and its themes. I like to call these kind of graphic adventure games experiential games. Games where the point isn't gameplay or replayability, but rather a focused exploration of a story or a set of themes with powerful presentation. So, when I saw the announcement for Neva last year, I wondered, how do you follow up a game like Greece? Could you really get away with doing the same thing again? Sequels in video games are weird, even for established developers and franchises. A lot of the time it's refine the mechanics, sand down the edges, change the setting, tell a new story. Sony's sequel output in the PS5 era has largely felt this way, which is probably why there's a feeling that that console lacks its own identity, however fair or unfair that might be, though that's another video. In modern gaming, iteration is expected. We've more or less cracked conventions by now, to the point that even Zelda, a series known for huge stylistic swings, felt this way with Tears of the Kingdom reusing the same art style, the same engine, and the map as Breath of the Wild. So it's easy to critique modern iteration, but oftentimes the iteration is all that you'd really want from a sequel, and some of the most acclaimed games of all times are direct sequels that simply refine the core idea of its predecessor. It's the kind of iteration that works artistically as much as it does economically, and I think most gamers have embraced that approach. So, iterative mechanics and a new setting work for gameplay-driven releases like God of War or Halo, but the same can't really be said for these experiential games. The double-edged sword of games like this is that they are potent emotional experiences because they lack traditional mechanics of their peers. They don't have mechanics to iterate on. As I booted up Sword of the Sea, the new game from Matt Nava, lead artist of Journey, I felt the same sense of deja vu that I had when I first saw Neva. How do you follow up on games that are liked for their visual novelty and experiential nature rather than their gameplay? For these games, the problem is less, what mechanics can we iterate on, and more, how do you iterate on an experience? We've actually seen different studios wrestle with this problem before. In 2013, Matt Nava left his previous company and founded Giant Squid, where they began work on following up Journey, a generationally important game in this space. What they came up with was Abzu, a similarly gorgeous graphic adventure with an oceanic setting to contrast the sand dunes of Journey. With Abzu, the iteration was this setting change, but in a genre where world interaction is minimal, Abzu felt like the same experience loaded into a different biome. There simply wasn't enough here to differentiate it from what Journey was doing, even though of course it was still beautiful. This is what Route 1 iteration of the genre looked like, and as such I don't think Abzu really had the impact on people who had already experienced Journey. Something else needed to be done to make this genre feel fresh and for new games to have impact. Coming back to Neva, I distinctly remember the first gameplay reveal at SGF in 2024, and a trailer that opens with sweeping vistas and the breathtaking art style that we saw in Greece. But about halfway through, something changes. Our protagonist takes out her sword and... wait, there's combat in this game. After the trailer ends, we cut back to Jeff Keighley, who sells the game by saying,
Trust me, that game is such a true work of art, especially when we get into some of the combat. It is tons of fun to play.
Wow, that sounds like Nomada are really emphasizing combat, a surprising turn after the low-stakes nature of Greece's puzzle platforming. In that same vein, the reveal trailer for Sword of the Sea features a main character cresting sand dunes, performing tricks and leaping off half-pipes, Tony Hawk style. What I like about both of these trailers is how obviously they put their acclaimed audio-visual presentation as the lead-in, but there's a wink and a nudge that neither of them are just the same as their predecessors. That's because the solution that both Giant Squid and Nomada Studios came up with was the same. Just add gameplay. As obvious and flippant as that might sound, adding a more tangible, mechanical gameplay to a game like Journey bears the risk of missing the point and the appeal of that game in the first place. So it's understandable why it wouldn't be the first port of call when making a spiritual successor. Gameplay is the conduit between the user and the world, and it allows you to make your impact on the story. But at the heart of the experience of Journey and Greece is letting the visuals and themes wash over you, rather than impacting the world yourself. The light gameplay of Journey is a feature meant to engross you more in the presentation of the moment. I think the approach of adding more iteration to experiential game works at pulling in more play-centered gamers like myself into the worlds that these creators have tailored, and differentiates them from their prime inspirations. Crucially though, those mechanics have to be fun, and they have to complement the game as a whole to work. As someone who played Journey a decade after its first release, the impact of that game was lost on me. It's not hard to see it was a revelation at the time, but it's also not hard to see why it doesn't really impress modern audiences. Sword of the Sea, on the other hand, is immediately fun to play. The addition of more nuanced movement mechanics with genuine skill expression and more sprawling level design creates a much more satisfying play experience, while still retaining a lot of the beauty and the really emotive presentation that made Journey such a phenomenon at the time. In a recent interview, Matt Nava mentioned that he got into surfing, and with Sword of the Sea, he wanted to make a game that captured the feeling of hitting waves at the right time and building momentum. Now, I haven't ever really surfed, but yeah, feels pretty cool to me. Cresting a sand dune to build up speed that allows you to launch yourself further into the sky is satisfying to execute, and allows you to pull off sick flips and adds a platformery element to the navigation. More surprising is how gamified the whole process is, as you collect more currency to unlock more elaborate moves and tricks throughout the game. Also, the way you can use this momentum to access new parts of a level is way more gameplay-y than I ever expected from a game from this developer. While playing through Sword of the Sea, I couldn't help how jarring it was to have such gamey elements embedded into a game proudly welcomes comparisons to Journey. In that same interview mentioned earlier, Nava said he intentionally avoided the colour palettes of Journey with subsequent games, but in Sword of the Sea claimed it felt like the right time. And I think that's because it's hard to think of Journey when you're aiming for a 20x multiplier on a half-pipe flip, yet the DNA of Journey is still all over the game. From the gorgeous environments with rolling sand dunes, to the isolated protagonists, to the ethereal OST of lilting piano chords accented by woodwinds. Sword of the Sea is constantly saying, yes, we made Journey, but we're not the same. Honestly, I found it much more fun. I've already seen the sentiment that this studio is still living under the shadow of Journey, but I disagree. I think Sword of the Sea is firmly planting its flag in a more gameplay forward experience that actually is fun and engaging to run through again and again, that rewards exploration with collectibles, that tells a more linear story with lore text, and that encourages skillful execution and comprehension of its platforming and movement mechanics. The game even culminates in a final boss encounter that you can die in. It's just so different. If you only see Journey here, you're missing all the interactive aspects of the level design and the mechanics that Journey was eschewing as mandatory in the medium at the time. I'm not saying these are deep mechanics, they're clearly quite simplistic, but they are engaging, and their addition, to me, doesn't sacrifice the awe or the resonance or the beauty of the art. Sword of the Sea, to me, is a marked improvement on Journey in every measurable way. Yet I know that this game will be forgotten to time, while Journey will remain standing tall. Because while I firmly believe that Sword of the Sea is a better single player game than Journey, I'm not so sure it's a better experience. Let me preface that when I say it's not a better experience, I mean within the context of the gaming landscape at the time. To try and top or recreate Journey for a lot of gamers is impossible. You're trying to capture lightning in a bottle when the lightning is long gone and everybody has already seen it anyway. In the indie scene particularly, there were games that launched to massive acclaim that feel rudimentary by today's standards. I don't think a game like Castle Crashers or even Limbo, if released today, really would make the same waves they did back then. That's not a knock on those games. If anything, it's a compliment to how influential they were and how far indie gaming has advanced since their release. Like all art, games are near impossible to divorce from their context. The period in which Journey launched is as important to its quality as the code that builds the game. In 2012, the idea of a wordless, gameplay-light, experiential 3-hour game wasn't really a thing at all. So not only are you competing with the iconic visuals that impacted people emotionally, you're competing with a feeling of genuine novelty and innovation. Journey, among many other games, helped expand the base idea of what a game could or should be, and you can't take that away from the game. Like, when I think of Greece, I think of that scene stumbling through the desert as the red winds of anger continually blast you backwards. I remember the protagonist voicelessly trying to make music again, but is too locked down in sorrow to do so. I remember slowly bringing back 5 colours, each symbolising the stages of grief, and how they mingled together and intruded into scenes at inopportune moments, and how that showed the non-linear nature of the grieving process. I remember the face of that character as I slowly brought colour back to her face. Colour brought back by confronting and processing her grief, rather than running away from it. It was a tumultuous ride that is inextricably linked with Nomada's art style in my brain. What I don't really remember are the puzzles that I completed in getting there. Back to Neva, the inverse is true. I had a lot of fun with the combat in that game, and there was a less metaphorical approach to its central story that did sometimes bring up emotion, but not in the consistently arresting way that Greece did. Neva does utilise its mechanics as a means of storytelling in a way that Greece never did, with you gaining more combat abilities as your wolf companion grows up and you become more bonded with it. This is probably why I don't remember the thematic or narrative shifts in Neva in the same way I did with Greece, because they were conveyed through the thing I do remember, which is the combat and the gameplay. In a way, this made the storytelling in Neva much more exclusive to gaming than what was done in Greece. Even still, I found it hard to get past the nagging feeling that Greece affected me more. But I still did love how Neva, utilising gameplay more, managed to still have an emotional, artsy story that was conveyed in ways other than Greece, even though it also used that iconic art style. Obviously, it's unfair to criticise a game because it doesn't have the cultural or personal impact of its predecessor, especially when the brunt of that impact is due to the context of its release. The addition of gameplay is how the new iterations are attempting to stand out in today's climate. But in making the follow-up more conventionally gamey, are you capitulating to the ethos of those past innovators? I don't think so. If asked to replay one of these games, I would choose Neva, just as I would choose Sword of the Sea over Journey. As a gamer, I still value game feel and mechanical expression above a raw experience, though the real genius lies in the balance of the two. One such game that struck this balance with surgical precision is Playdead's Inside. Inside, like these other games, was a follow-up to an indie hit, but went the opposite way. Limbo had much higher density of platforming puzzles than Inside, and by rolling back the amount of interactivity, Inside achieved a far more stunning experience, while still retaining the best of the game design of Limbo. I played these games back to back in 2021, and I barely remember anything about the themes or story of Limbo, but Inside has left an indelible mark on my brain, and I also remember the high quality puzzle design of Inside as well. This is the balance I'm looking for, and it's a balance I think Sword of the Sea and Neva found as well. And more graphic adventures that marry the slow-moving experiential nature of the genre with more interactive elements are cropping up these last few years. I'm sort of conflicted when I think about how I enjoyed these types of games more when they add more traditional gameplay. After all, isn't what's special about them the fact that they've intentionally removed that gameplay? Journey is commonly cited as one of the best proofs for games being art, precisely because it values viscerality over tactile feedback. I find it kind of problematic that we need to point to esoteric artsy games that throw out the bedrock conventions of gaming to claim our validity as art, even when the most arcadey game is still just as valid a piece of art as the most cerebral game you can think of. The beauty of gaming is how broad an umbrella it is. Games like Sword of the Sea are this full circle moment, where such outwardly artsy games can still contain high score challenges, sword combat, and game overs, without pretensions that we're somehow diluting the artistry of the medium by including such things. The graphic adventure genre is one that I have come to love and appreciate more as I expose myself to them over time, because there isn't really anything like them. They're the simplest kinds of game, but also the hardest to innovate on, and following them up seems like it requires much more introspection and thought than your typical sequel. The right time, right place magic of games like Journey can never be recaptured, but the solution that Giant Squid, Nomada Studios, and Playdead have found prove that experiential games don't need to choose between art and play to keep the soul of what makes them good.